All right. Hello, everyone. I apologize for all the confusion about my availability tonight, but I'm in Virginia in my hotel room, as you can see behind me, for the next 2 weeks for my PhD residency. But I wanted to get this lecture recorded on Hinduism so that you guys could have it and take a look at it. And just a reminder, since this is our second lecture in world religions, last week we lectured on introductory material, and so this is our first religion. And just to remind you, you've got two sources for information on the world religions that we're going to be studying. You've got your textbook, which is embedded in Canvas, and then you have this lecture. There will be some overlap, obviously, but it's not a perfect overlap. I'm not lecturing from the textbook. I'm lecturing from my own notes. So you'll see some differences. But anyway, we'll go ahead and dive right in and talk about our first world religion, which is Hinduism. And if you can see the map here on the screen, you see towards the bottom of the screen, India, the Indian subcontinent. Most of the Hindus in the world live right here in India. There's quite a few Hindus in the United States, quite a few Hindus in England and Great Britain, that area, England, Ireland, Scotland, that area, other European countries, but the vast majority of Hindus in the world live right here on the Indian subcontinent. And so when we talk about Hinduism, it's one of the oldest religions on the planet, major religion of the Indian subcontinent. The interesting thing that you're going to discover about Hinduism that really won't come up again in this course, at least not until those of you that select Japanese religion as your presentation, for your content for your presentation, is there's really no single founder that anybody can point to that founded the religion. Doesn't have a real strong organizational structure, doesn't have creeds. If you think about statements that affirm the various beliefs of a religion, if you're a Christian, you think about the Nicene Creed, or if you're Muslim, you think about the Shahada. There's really no creed that the Hindus affirm. So in reality, it's kind of hard for us to grasp this because it's such an old religion that it's not really a single united religion. If you think about when European explorers arrived on the Indian subcontinent, what they observed all over the region was they observed all these different people who were worshiping in a similar manner with similar beliefs. And so what Hinduism really is it is an indigenous religion on the Indian subcontinent that European explorers sort of lumped together into one religion that they called Hindu. And Hindu is sort of a variation of one of the main rivers that runs through India, the Indus River. You'll hear people talk about India, and you'll hear people talk about the Indus River Valley. And so these people that lived in and around the Indus River worshipped similar deities with similar practices. And European explorers just said that these people are Hindu. Their religion is Hindu. And within Hinduism, there's about 300 million different deities. And deity is a word, if you're not familiar with that term, deity is a word we use to refer to God, right? To God or gods. So 300 million different deities. Here's a timeline sort of to think about some of the major periods, and this won't mean much until we kind of get further along into our study of Hinduism. But you're looking at the formation of the religion going back to the Vedic period around 1500 BCE. I just want to say really quickly that you see 1500 to 500 BCE, 500 to 1500 CE, and I just want to make sure you understand what BCE and CE means. You may have grown up using the terms BC and AD to talk about the various major divisions in time. BC meaning before Christ, and AD being a Latin term, Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. What many people in academia have done is they've opted for different terminology because not everyone divides time according to the birth of Jesus, the founder of Christianity. And so in academics, what you'll see is you'll see BCE, which means before the Common Era, and CE, which means Common Era. And there is a direct overlap between BC and BCE and AD and CE. So the time periods are the same. It's just different terminology that sort of has risen to the top in academics. So you can see here that you've got, that we know of, Hinduism at least going back to 1500 BCE, all the way up to the present. So let's talk about the Vedas. Those are the scriptures that the Hindus use, written between 2000 and 500 BCE. Means knowledge, also means sacred lore, and there are 4 collections of text: the Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, and Atharva Veda. There's other Vedas as well. There's and we'll mention at least one of those a little later when we talk about Gandhi. But you can see here that even though, let's go back to the previous slide, I said that you can trace the formation of the religion back to 1500 BCE. This is what this means is when I say the formation of the religion, I mean that this is when the religion had text that it could formalize around 1500 BCE. That doesn't mean the religion was formed. That means that the religion became more formal around 1500 BCE because of the presence of the Vedas, which were written around 2000 BCE. All right, so let's go through the different Vedas, give you an overview of what they are. So Rig Veda is hymn knowledge. This is a collection of hymns, songs. Yajur Veda, this is, how do we ceremonially express our religious ideas? This is recitations used for sacrifices, different ceremonies that you can perform in Hinduism. Samaveda, this is chants, musical chants, a little different than hymns. And then Atharva Veda, this is practical prayers, things to pray about, charms to use. So these are the 4 primary Vedas that emerged prior to the Vedic period. Panach Shads are another type of scripture that the Hindus use, really more philosophical, religious, meditative. This is the work within Hinduism that may be more similar to some of the works you might be familiar with in other religion. Comprised of about 100 works, while the Vedas really emphasize priesthood, the things the priesthood would do. The Panach Shads really kind of opened up the idea of this, this common priesthood, that any practitioner could be a priest or a spiritual master. And so there's a lot of practical, sort of philosophical understandings. Here are some concepts that emerged in the Upanishads. First is Brahman. So originally, Brahman was meant to stand for the cosmic power present in the universe. Right? That was the original idea. The Upanishads, which is more of a philosophical text, expanded that to mean a divine reality. So original Hindus, when they thought of Brahman, they thought of Brahman as the ultimate deity. And the Upanishads sort of expanded that philosophically to mean this is a divine reality at the heart of all things. So for Hindus, Brahman is not just something you believe in, but it's something that can be known, like internally, experientially, can be known. The way that you know Brahman is through this lived experience where you recognize that Brahman is in everything. Everything can be regarded as holy because it came from the same sacred source. So Brahman would be, and this is a concept that sometimes in the West we have a problem with because it's hard to kind of grasp. So the illustration, breaks down at some point, but the closest Western idea that you can get to Brahman is the monotheistic idea of God, that God is over everything and directs everything. But for Hindus, it's a little more mystical than that. Idea is close to the same. If there were an ultimate deity, and that there is, but it's a little different than that. But if there were this ultimate deity in Hinduism, Brahman would represent that ultimate deity. And so to know Brahman is to know that every individual reality in the world emanates from Brahman. Another concept, or here's a quote rather from the let me get rid of my picture so I can see. This is a quote from one of the Panach Shads. In the beginning, and this is about Brahman. In the beginning, there was existence alone. So it's not just a person, right? It's existence alone. So that's different, kind of similar, but different, a little more mystical than a being, right? So in the beginning, there was existence alone, one only, without a second. He, the one, thought to himself, let me be many, let me grow forth. Thus, out of himself, he projected the universe, and having projected out of himself the universe, he entered into every being. All that is has its self in him alone. Of all things, he is a subtle essence. He is the truth, he is the self, and that art thou, meaning that that's what you are. You emanate from Brahman. Atman is another concept in the Upanishads. It's really similar to what we would call the soul or the self, the deepest self. So at the deepest level of what I am, there's this part of me that is a divine sort of reality. So when Atman, when the deepest self is experienced fully, it's identical to Brahman. So Atman, like Brahman, is divine, holy, and timeless. And so often what you find in Hinduism is that Brahman refers to the experience of the sacred within nature, the universe, while Atman refers to the experience of the sacred within oneself. So Atman and Brahman are the goal is for them to be indistinguishable, that you reach a level of consciousness and a level of spiritual purity where there is no distinction between the two. Maya, this is what we speak of as illusion or magic within Hinduism. It means the world's real, but not quite in this way most people assume. So human beings view the world as consisting of individual things and people. In Hinduism, the world is basically one holy reality, right? That's what we saw when we were discussing Brahman, is that the world is one holy reality emanating from Brahman that takes on different forms. So the meaning of reality is different in Hinduism than typically the way we express it in the West. In and around the 1st and 2nd century, there was it really precedes the first century, but you really kind of see it expressed in the first century. There was a Greek philosophical, and for Greeks, philosophy was religion essentially. There was this Greek philosophical idea that we call Gnosticism. The Greek word for knowing is gnosis, and that's where we get the word Gnosticism from. But Gnostics had a sort of a similar idea to Hinduism about reality. So the Gnostics would say is that, I'm sitting in this chair, right? What a Gnostic would say is that the actual physical presence of the chair is not reality. Reality is the idea behind the chair. So when the person who designed this chair was sitting down and thinking about this chair, those ideas about the chair became reality in the thought. And then the physical presentation, the physical manifestation of the chair is simply just a reflection of that sort of ethereal reality. And again, it kind of blows your mind to think about it a little bit. But if you've ever studied Gnosticism, then hopefully that'll help you to understand exactly what Hindus mean by, what you see is not real, or it is real, but it's not as real as the spiritual force that existed to make that thing so that you could see it. So reality is like a great consciousness. Time is not linear, it's relative. And individuals are not individuals like they think they are, but they're manifestations of the divine spirit, which means that if you are a manifestation of the divine spirit, when you die, that's not the end, because reality is not the life you're experiencing now. Life is the divinity from which you emanated. And so, as we'll see as we move through Hinduism, that the goal then is to perfectly align with that divinity. And there's a term for that, and we'll get to that. All right, moving on. Karma. Now, here's what we say about karma. If I cut you off in traffic and then I wreck, you would say, well, that's karma. Not in Hinduism. Karma is different in Hinduism. Karma is it's comes from root word to do. It's like there are moral consequences to actions, but not temporary. It's not about this temporary, immediate sort of consequence of action. So again, if I cut you off in traffic and then I wreck, and you say that's karma, well, that's not karma. That would be closer to a Buddhist idea of karma. But what karma is in Hinduism is the way that you live your life, this temporary life, the way that you live it impacts what happens to you in the next life. So, and we'll look at it at the next slide, but Hindus believe in reincarnation. And so how you live this life affects what happens in the next life, how you are reborn in the next life. A good life produces a good next life. That's good karma. A bad life produces a bad outcome in the next life, and that is bad karma. So you have this higher and lower ideas of rebirth. And I don't mean just theoretically higher and lower. We're going to look at the caste system in a few minutes, where there is a literal higher and lower, and wherever you are, whatever caste you are in, has everything to do with the type of life you lived before, your previous life. And so karma is not about, I do something bad today and then something bad happens to me today. In Hinduism, karma is the sum of your life reflects a higher or lower rebirth, and that's karma. I hope that makes sense. So it's not good or bad. It's like gravity. It's only good or bad to the person experiencing it, right? Like if you, the fact that you are not floating, trying to hold on to something that is nailed down means gravity's good. But if you fall from a Ferris wheel, gravity's not that great because it means that you've got a hard stop coming at the ground because whatever goes up comes down. So hope that helps you understand karma. A couple of the concepts related to karma, samsara and moksha. So samsara is this wheel of life. So in Hinduism, if you can think about existence, you have this circle of birth, then you live, then you have death, then you have rebirth and death and rebirth and death and rebirth, right? So this circle of life, samsara. And so what the Hindu believes is that we're all reincarnated over and over and over and over. And I think, generally speaking, they would say that humans can expect to live millions of lives. The goal then for Hinduism, the ultimate goal, is to escape this wheel, to escape samsara, and to achieve moksha. Moksha means liberation, freedom, comes from a root word that means to be released. So when you read the Panach Shads, moksha is the ultimate human goal. You want to escape that circle. You want to beat karma at its own game, so to speak. So if you achieve moksha, then you've been liberated from the limitations of being an individual. And the way that you do this is through the various practices of Hinduism, through insight and ascetic practices and practicing the different yogas and living a good life. And as you live a good life and you're reincarnated better, and then you live that life and you're reincarnated better. And every life that you live, you gain more and more spiritual insight, and you become closer and closer and closer to Brahma, and your Atman and Brahma are becoming, through millions of lives, fused together until one day you live your last life. And at that moment, at the moment of death, then you become one with Brahman and you achieve moksha. That's the goal. So I mentioned the caste system. So within Hinduism as a religion, now I said earlier at the very first part of the lecture that the majority of Hindus in the world live in the Indian subcontinent, right? So India, the country of India. And so since that's where most Hindus live, they have a society whereby they have merged their religious belief with their social structure. And the caste system is a big part of that. So it's a division of society into social classes. And those social classes are assigned at birth. So mentioned earlier with karma, your previous life determines your next life. And so for the Hindu, they have, and I'm going to define the different levels of the caste system. But, well, let's just look at them here, right? So you can't really intermarry. You can't change your caste, right? Whatever you're born with, that's your caste. That's who you are, right? That's what your kids will be. That's what their kids will be. You're in that caste. But there are 5 main social classes. Brahmin, which are the priests. Kshatriya, which are the warriors. That's the army, the nobles, the aristocracy. Vaishya, that's the merchants, landowners, bankers. Shudra, peasants. And Dalit, which are untouchables. These are people that deal with the dead bodies and do all the lowest jobs, what you consider the lowest jobs in a society. So you have these 5 main social classes. So if you were born a Brahmin, so if you're a Brahmin today, then that means in your previous life, you lived a good enough life that you were promoted in this life, right? If you were a Dalit, let's just go to the bottom of the social structure. If you're a Dalit, then the life you are living here is a direct result of the life you lived before, right? So if you're Hindu and you set your social structure in your country based on your religion, then if you are a Dalit, you deserve it because of the way you lived before, right? It'd be similar to us riding by a prison and seeing inmates out in the yard in their orange jumpsuits. We would be thankful that we're not a prisoner. And even if we have compassion on them, we would say, well, they're in there because they did something, right? Not everybody in there was wrongfully accused. Some of those people are murderers. Some of those people stole a bunch of money, right? Some of those people did assault or whatever they're in prison for, right? So you have compassion on them and you want them treated well. But at the end of the day, you're like, dude, they're prisoners because they did something wrong. That's similar, again, illustrations tend to break down, but that's similar to how Hindus look at the different, especially the lower classes. And I hope that explains it. So if you think about, let's just kind of back up at 30,000 feet and let's look at what we've learned thus far. You have these lives that you live. You have this wheel, right? Samsara. You have this wheel of birth, death, rebirth, right? You have this wheel. The goal is to escape the wheel. The way that you escape the wheel is by living a better life, and then a better life, and then a better life. And the evidence, if you will, the evidence of that in Hindu society is the caste that you were born into. So if you're born as a Brahmin, that means that you lived a good previous life, right? So that's sort of the physical manifestation of this idea. And that's why they have it. That's why it was set up. Now, if you want to get cynical, you could say that whoever set this up, who are the very first people to set this up, the people who had the idea of the caste system probably put themselves in the Brahmin class, right? So you get a little cynical about it, but we're really here to just study the religious nature of it. So let's go to how some of the ways that you practice Hinduism. So yogas are methods that people use in Hinduism to be spiritual and to live out their spirituality. It means union. So when we think of yoga, right, you think of midwives in yoga pants doing yoga in the middle of the day, right? Or, yoga studios, or people that are really flexible and have, these lean, strong bodies, and yoga's so good for you, right? And they're very flexible. But yoga as a Hindu term is really the various ways that you practice your religion, right? They're ways that you commune with Brahman and have union with divinity, right? So they sometimes refer to as paths. Yogas can be paths. And so your caste or your personality type helps determine which yoga you practice, because not every Hindu practices every type of yoga, right? So let's look at the different ones, right? 6 major types: Jnana, Karma, Bhakti, Raja, Hatha, and Kundalini. So let's look at the different ones. Karma yoga, right? This is purposeful work. This is doing things that are unselfish. This is helping other people. This is being, philanthropic. This is giving blankets to homeless people. This is doing good charitable works, right? It means activity, basically, just good activity. And you do it not for reward, not for desire, because if you do it wanting a reward and wanting people to say attaboy, then it triggers negative karma, right? So the only way this works if you do it unselfishly. Bhakti yoga, this is various expressions of devotion. Let me minimize the screen so I can't see the text. Chants, songs, food offerings, anointing statues, Acts of devotions to your spiritual teacher, Raja Yoga, it's meditation. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to meditate before, but it's hard. It's really hard to calm your mind. If you've done for short periods, but then as you learn it, you do it for longer periods. And Hindus believe that meditation can lead to newer and higher states of consciousness. Hatha yoga, force yoga. This is what most of us think about when we think of the physical exercise of yoga. It's really developed as a tool for meditation. The breathing, the various poses help you to focus your mind on the meditating, stretching, breathing. Kundalini combines elements of Raja and Hatha. This is, I'm just going to show you the picture on the next page. It's a form of yoga where you sit in this pose. And according to people that practice this form of yoga, you have 7 chakras. You have 7 sort of spiritual points, if you will. That's not really a good way to say it. You have 7 spiritual points on your body, top of your head. You have in between your eyes, your throat, your heart, here in the abdomen, the bottom of the back, the sacral region, and then the root. So you have these 7, and so you sit in a way with perfect posture to align these chakras, and you meditate. So aligning those chakras and meditating produces, whoops, I don't know how that happened. Let me stop sharing and get back to my slide. Hold on just a second. Sorry about that. I'll be right back to it. So hold on a minute. Let me. Oh, here we go. Went the wrong way. Here we go. So Kundalini. There we go. So you align your chakras, and what that does is that aligns your spiritual energy, and it increases your insight, it increases your joy, it increases your connection with Brahman. So that's a very typical thing that you'll see in Hinduism. All right, let's look at some of the deities. Brahma, god of creation. Vishnu, preservation. Shiva, destruction and recreation. Devi is a divine mother. Durga, perseverance. Lakshmi, success. Kali, destruction and recreation. Saraswati, music and culture. And here's some pictorial representations within Hindu. And there's this artistic style within Hinduism. Like if you see a picture in Hinduism, it has this certain artistic style. And listen, I'm not an artist. I can't really speak to that. But when you see these pictures, you know what I'm talking about. The bodies all look very similar. The colors are very vibrant. There's Brahma and Vishnu, pictorial representation of them. Shiva and Devi. Durga and Lakshmi. Kali and Saraswati. This is one of the most popular deities in Hinduism is Ganesh. A lot of homes, if you go into a Hindu home, you'll see a shrine to that family's deity, the deity they mainly worship. And particularly among Hindus that live in the United States, Ganesh is by far and away the most popular of the deities. You find men named Ganesh. It's very popular. So the Trimurti is a triple form of gods. It's like 3 of the most important gods that you find in Hinduism: Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So Brahma represents that creative force of Brahman. So you have Brahman, and then his creative force. If you remember, I read that quote where in the Upanishads, it said that he became many, Brahman became many. So what they believe then is that a deity emanated from Brahman to create the universe, and that deity is Brahma. Right? Ancient, thoughtful king. Vishnu preserves the universe, associated with the sun, warmth, light. He destroys darkness. Right? 75% of all Hindus in India worship Vishnu. Shiva, the goddess of destruction, or rather, the god of destruction. Worship of Shiva extends beyond the Vedic period, possibly the oldest god worshipped in Hinduism. When we hear that, we associate Shiva with destruction and punishment, but it's not really how Hindus look at it. They see it more as a recycling, right? Death happens so that new forms may appear. Death happens so that new life can appear. So since there's samsara, since there's this wheel of birth, life, death, rebirth, life, death, right? There's that circle. Death is not final. Death is a pathway to a new life. So it's a little different view of death. A lot of goddesses, a lot of feminine worship in Hinduism. Female divinities is really a part of the religion. If you were to go back in time to the 2000, 1500 BCE, you would really see it associated with fertility. Life is important, right? Because you have death, then you have life, and so fertility among women is how the new life begins, right? So Devi is often referred to as the Great Mother. Very popular for destroying evil, often seen riding a tiger. Kali is this fearsome goddess, wears a necklace of human skulls. That's pretty hardcore. Very protective. So what are some challenges to Hinduism? We'll talk about this with each religion that we talk about. What are the challenges to that religion? When we mean challenges, I mean, what are the threats? So what threatens Hinduism from within the religion, and then what threatens Hinduism from without? So we're just using the word challenge rather than threat. Internally, like any religion, you have mobility. People are not just living in tribes in small villages anymore. They're living in large cities with technology. You have the fracturing of the family that exists within Hinduism. Relocation presents a challenge to the religion. As Indian society becomes more advanced, what you see, just like in every culture, as the culture becomes more advanced, then you see people are less inclined to be religious, right? And then you have this migration away from India to non-Hindu countries. They sort of lose their connection to the religion unless they are part of a Hindu community in the new place where they live. So it challenges devotion. What are some external threats? Now, there are two primary external challenges historically. One of them doesn't exist anymore, but throughout the history of Hinduism, the two biggest threats have been Islam and British colonialism. Now, we'll discuss this when we get to Islam, but of the world religions that we will study, Islam is really the only one that sort of in its charter, it's not a good word, but in its charter, it's okay to spread the religion through military campaigns and forced conversions. And so there's been a couple of invasions of India from Islamic forces. There certainly are Muslims in India, but Hinduism is still the predominant religion. Beginning in the 13th century, several Islamic states began to be set up on the Indian subcontinent, but that was all diminished and done away with when the British arrived in the 19th century. Which brings us to if we were going to study Hinduism in depth, if this was a course on Hinduism, we would spend more time talking about British colonialism. But essentially what the British would do, they would arrive at an area, India, and they would just take over. That country would become sort of a state, if you will, under British rule. The British would begin to establish British forms of rule with governors and things like that. And the other thing the British would try to do is the British, it was really important to them that they would create a British society and culture with British norms, right? And so this was a serious challenge to the culture that the Hindus had, and it was a constant form of conflict until the British finally left. But it was certainly a conflict. There's still quite a bit of tension between Hindus and Muslims. Sharia law is a thing that exists in Islam that we'll talk about when we get to Islam, but it's essentially religious law. When Muslims move into an area, historically, they will enact Sharia law, which means that people have to abide by Muslim teachings and Muslim dress codes and other sort of religious aspects of a Muslim life. Christianity really didn't present a challenge, not the religion of Christianity, but liberal European thought about women, injustices related to how they would treat the Dalits, child marriage, polytheism, like those European ideas that were certainly born in the Christian religion challenged Hinduism, but it wasn't Christianity as a religion per se, as much as it was various moral aspects that existed among the Christian religions, like you can't marry kids, you can't marry multiple women, you can't treat the poor in your society with such disdain the way they were treating the lower caste, things like that. Of course, in Western society, women have a more prominent role. This is not something that existed within Hinduism. And so that's been a challenge to Hindu way of thought and life. Let's look at Gandhi. So you've probably at least heard the name Gandhi, born in the 1800s when the British controlled India. Went to school in London, became a fan of Jesus and Sermon on the Mount, but didn't convert to Christianity. Read the Bhagavad Gita. That's one of the Panach Shads that we didn't really. Well, it's not really an Panach Shad, but it's read the Bhagavad Gita, which is an important religious work among Hindus. Read it for the first time, rediscovered Hinduism, and then in 1891 moves to South Africa to practice law. Eventually, he comes back to India, becomes the leader of a nonviolent movement. So in 1915, he establishes this nonviolent movement to expel the British from India, which finally took place in 1947. So the interesting thing about Gandhi, who was assassinated by Hindu extremists in 1948, is that when you look at the civil rights movement in the United States in the 60s, particularly with Martin Luther King Jr., Martin Luther King Jr. really modeled a lot of the civil rights movement after what Gandhi did. All the peaceful marches that he participated in, this non-violent means to achieve equality among minorities in the United States, or blacks really, especially in the South under the Jim Crow laws. And so even though Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, you can say that his nonviolent approach to protest really worked, because obviously we passed a constitutional amendment about discrimination, and had the civil rights legislation of the 60s that was really headed up by Johnson. Democrats wouldn't vote for it, so Johnson had to take a handful of Democrats and almost all the Republicans in Congress and pass the civil rights legislation in the 60s. But it got passed. Now it's really embedded in American law and in American life. And so this was all through nonviolent protest, which really Gandhi was sort of the chief inspiration for Martin Luther King Jr. So here's what I just did. I just did a really quick overview of Hinduism. This lecture, along with your textbook, should answer most of your questions. And if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And you guys have a good day.